Infinite existence. The idea of time as the fourth dimension does not contradict our ordinary views of life, as long as we take time as a straight line. This idea only brings with it a sensation of greater preordination, and of greater inevitability. However, the idea of time as a curve of the fourth dimension entirely changes our concept of life. If we clearly understand the meaning of this curvature, particularly when we begin to see how the curve of the fourth dimension is transformed into the curves of the fifth and the sixth dimensions, our views of things and of ourselves can no longer remain what they were. As noted previously, according to the initial scheme of dimensions in which dimensions are still taken as straight lines, the fifth dimension is a line perpendicular to the line of the fourth dimension and intersecting it. That is to say, a line that passes through every moment of time, a line of the infinite existence of any given moment. But how is this line formed, where does it come from, and what follows out of it? This can be understood to a certain extent if life is taken as a series of undulatory vibrations. What has been noted from the study of undulatory vibrations in the world of physical phenomena is that every wave comprises in itself a complete circle. That is, the matter of the wave moves in a completed curve in the same place, for as long as the force continues to act upon it which created the wave. We know also that every wave consists of smaller waves, and is in its turn a component of a larger wave. If we take simply for the sake of argument, days as the smaller waves that form the bigger waves of years, then the waves of years will form one great wave of life. Therefore, as long as this wave of life rolls on, the waves of days and the waves of years must rotate at their appointed places, repeating and repeating themselves. Thus the line of the fourth dimension, the line of life or time, consists of wheels of ever-repeating days, of small circles of the fifth dimension, just as long as the primary shock that sends forth the particular ray persists. However, in itself a ray may be a curve, a component part of some other bigger wave. The same applies to the line of life. If we take it as one great wave consisting of the waves of days and years, then we shall have to admit that the line of life moves in a curve and makes a complete revolution, coming back to the point of its departure. Then if a day or a year is a wave in the undulatory movement of our lives, then our whole life is a wave in some other undulatory movement of which we know nothing. As has been previously pointed out, in our ordinary concept, life appears as a straight line drawn between the moments of birth and death. However, if we imagine that life is a wave, then we get the figure illustrated. The point of death coincides with the point of birth. For one who has followed the development of the ideas that touch on the dimensions of time in preceding chapters, then this point does not present any difficulty and on the contrary results naturally from all that has been previously stated. However, after this point there usually comes a question that is more difficult to answer. Namely, how an identical relation between the births and deaths of different people is preserved, when we know that the relation between their deaths is quite different, i.e. that it does not correspond with the relation of their births. To put it more simply, what will happen to a person who has died before their grandfather? They must be born immediately, and their mother is as yet unborn. Two answers are possible. First, it is feasible to say that at the moment when the soul touches infinity, different relations of time become adjusted, because a moment of eternity can have different time value. Second, it is possible to say that our usual concept of dimensions of time are wrong. For example, for us time can have different duration, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. But it always has the same speed. However, where are proofs of this? Perhaps time, in certain limits, for instance, in relation to human life, always has the same duration but different speed. One is not more arbitrary than the other, but with the admission of this possibility the question disappears. When discussing Tertium Organum, the third canon of thought, a vision was shared by the Dutch theosophist, Johann van Manen was illustrated who saw this manifestation in 1913. The vision was described by van Manen, and an illustration made consisting of two circles, one inside the other. It is the figure of life. The small circle stands for man, the large circle for the life of man. The small circle rolls inside the large circle, which first widens then gradually becomes narrower and brings the small circle to the same point from which it started. In rolling along the large circle, the small circle continually rotates on its own axis. This rotation is eternity in relation to time, which is movement along the large circle. Here again we meet what appears to be a paradox. The fifth dimension inside the fourth dimension, and movement along the fifth dimension creating movement along the fourth dimension. How are we to find then the beginning and the end? Which is the driving force? Which is driven? Is it the small circle that rotates, driven by the shock that sends it around the large circle, or is it the large circle itself that is driving the rotation of the small circle? The one drives the other. But in relation to life, taken as the large circle, eternity is to be found first in the small circle of repeating moments, days, and years, then second in the repetition of the large circle itself. In the repetition of life. That is, in the repetition of the waves. Just as in the case of the fourth dimension, we are again faced with the fact that a higher dimension is both above and below the lower dimension. The fourth dimension for us lies in the world of celestial bodies, and in the world of molecules. The fifth dimension lies in the moments of life eternally remaining where they are, and in the repetition of life itself, taken as a whole. Life in itself is time for man. For man, there is not and cannot be any other time outside of his own lifetime. Man is his life. His life is his allotted time. The way of measuring time for all by means of such phenomena as the apparent or real movement of the sun or the moon is comprehensible as being convenient, practically. However, it is generally forgotten that this is only a formal time accepted by common agreement. Absolute time for us is our life. There can be no other time outside this time. If I die today, then tomorrow will not exist for me. But, as previously noted, all theories of the future life or existence after death, of reincarnation, and so on, contain one obvious mistake. They are all based on the usual understanding of time, that is, on the idea that tomorrow will exist after death. In reality, it is just in this that life differs from death. A person dies because their time ends, and there can be no tomorrow after their death. All usual concepts of the future life require the existence of tomorrow. What future life can there be if it suddenly appears there is no future, no tomorrow, no time, or no after this? Spiritualists, theosophists, theologians, and others who know everything about the future life may find themselves in a very strange situation, if the fact is realized that no hereafter exists. What then is possible? And what may the meaning of life as a circle be? It was previously observed that the curvature of the line of time implies the presence in it of yet another dimension, namely the fifth dimension or eternity. So if in the usual understanding the fourth dimension is extension of time, what can the fifth dimension or eternity be? Eternity for our mind is conceivable only in two forms. Either in the form of coexistence, or in the form of repetition. The form of coexistence requires space concepts. Somewhere there exist things identical with those here, identical people, an identical world. The form of repetition requires time concepts. Sometime or other, everything will be repeated or is repeated, either immediately or after the completion of that particular cycle. That is of the particular life, or after every moment. The latter, the immediate repetition of every moment again and again, brings this idea closer to the idea of coexistence. But for our mind, it is more convenient to think of the idea of repetition in the form of the repetition of cycles. One life ends, and another begins. One time ends, and another begins. Death is really a return to the beginning and nothing more than that. This means that if a person was born in 1977 and died in the year 2012, then having died they find themselves once again in 1977, and must live the same life all over again. In dying, in completing the circle of life, they enter the same life from the other end. They are born again in the same town, in the same street, are brought into the same house, of the same parents, in the same year, on the same day and at the same time. They will have the same brothers and sisters, the same uncles and aunts, the same toys, the same kittens and puppies, the same friends, and they will love the same people. They will make the same mistakes, laugh and cry at the same events, rejoice and suffer in the same way. Then when their time comes, they will die in exactly the same way as they did before, and again at the moment of their death, it will be as though all the clocks were put back to 7:35 a.m. on the 2nd of September, 1977, and from this moment, started again with their usual movement. The new life begins in exactly the same conditions as the preceding one, and it cannot begin in any other conditions. The only thing that can and must be admitted is the fact of the strengthening with every life of the tendencies of the preceding life, of those tendencies that grew and increased during life, both bad and good tendencies. Those that were a manifestation of strength, and those that were a manifestation of weakness. There exists indeed, much more psychological material for the idea of eternal recurrence than is supposed, but the existence of this material is not fully realized by scientific thought. Everybody knows the sensation or descriptions of the sensation that is experienced sometimes by people, particularly in childhood. The sensation that this has happened before, of déjà vu. The two poems quoted previously could have been inspired by the same sensation. The usual explanations for this account for 2 categories out of 3 of these sensations, but leave the third category unexplained. Constantly recurring memories according to psychological theory, are produced by 2 causes. Firstly, they depend upon breaks in consciousness, when consciousness suddenly disappears for one quite imperceptible moment, and then flashes in again. In this case, the situation in which one finds oneself, that is all that surrounds us, seems to have happened before, possibly long ago in some unknown past. The breaks themselves are explained by the possibility of some psychic function being carried out by different parts of our thinking apparatus. As a result of this, one function having accidentally stopped in one part, is immediately taken up and continued in another, producing the impression that the same situation has occurred previously. Secondly, the same sensation may be produced by an associative resemblance between totally different experiences. When a stone or a tree, any object may remind one of somebody once known very well, of some place, of a certain event in our life. This happens when, for instance, one feature or line of an object reminds us of a feature in a person, or in some other object, of some thought associated with that object. The third category is characterized by the fact of the sensation that this has happened before, though very vivid and frequent in childhood, it tends to disappear in adult life. In some cases, this special kind of foreknowledge of people, things, places and events can be verified and established. The very rare trustworthy cases of clairvoyance belong to such foreknowledge. But in itself, the fact of these accidental recollections, even if they are really recollections, is too small to allow anything to be built upon it. A person may be perfectly justified in asking, if such a tremendous phenomenon as the repetition of lives really exists, then why do we know nothing of it, why do we not remember more? And why did people not realize this long ago, why is it only now presented to us as a new discovery? All these questions are of course well-founded, however at the same time it is not difficult to answer them. Earlier we examined the transformation of a butterfly as an example of evolution. What is particularly characteristic for us in the transformation of a butterfly, from the point of view in question, is the fact that in passing to a new level of transformation, the butterfly completely vanishes from the preceding level. It dies on the preceding level, ceases to exist there. That is, it loses all connection with its former existence. If a butterfly sees and learns more, then it is unable to tell the caterpillars anything about it, because it is already dead as a caterpillar, and has vanished from the world of caterpillars. Something analogous may happen to people to whom the mysteries of time and eternity are revealed. They know and can speak of what they know, but people will neither hear nor understand them. Why have people not realized long ago the truth of the idea of eternal recurrence? They did in fact realize it long ago. We have examined briefly the teachings of Pythagoras, the teachings of the Buddha, theories on reincarnation and the transmigration of souls that are only a distortion of the idea of eternal recurrence. Many other ideas of the future life, various allusions in occult teaching, for instance the very strange idea of the possibility of changing the past, various popular beliefs such as the cult of ancestors, all of these are connected with the idea of recurrence. It is clear that the idea of recurrence cannot be popular in its pure form, if only because it seems absurd from the standpoint of ordinary three-dimensional sensations, from the standpoint of the usual view of time. The usual view of time leaves no place for recurrence. On the contrary, according to the ordinary wisdom of the world, nothing ever returns. So even in those teachings in which the idea of recurrence undoubtedly existed in its pure form, as for example in Buddhism, it has become distorted and adapted to our usual understanding of time. According to the recent interpretations of learned Buddhists, a person is born into a new life at the very moment of their death. However, this is a continuation in time. Modern Buddhists have rejected their absurd idea of a return into the past, and their wheel of lives rolls in the direction of the calendar. In this manner, they have taken away all force from the idea, however have made it acceptable to the masses and capable of logical explanation or interpretation. In speaking of the idea of eternal recurrence, it is necessary to understand that it cannot be proven in the ordinary way, that is by the usual methods of observation and verification. We know but one line of time, the one on which we now live, because we are one-dimensional beings in relation to time. We have no knowledge of parallel lines. Suppositions as to the existence of parallel lines cannot be proven as long as we remain on one line. In the chapters covering Tertium Organum, the universe of a one-dimensional being was described. These beings know nothing aside from their own line. If they supposed the existence of something new, something they did not know before, then for them it would have to be on their own line, either in front of them or behind them. Our position in relation to time is exactly the same. Everything that exists must occupy a certain place in time, either in front of or behind us, and there can be nothing parallel to us. This means that we cannot prove the existence of anything parallel as long as we remain on our line. However, if we attempt to break away from ordinary views, and bear in mind that the supposition of the possible existence of other lines of time parallel to ours is more scientific than the usual naive one-dimensional concept of time, then the concept of life as a recurring phenomenon will prove to be easier than we imagine.